Welcome everybody to the Living Your Career show. My name is Roisin Duffy, Director of Blue Sky Careers. Our theme today is brave or stupid. Take the right risks to grow your career. Human beings are innately wired to be risk adverse. Many of us, I would say, are probably slaves to the jobs that we do. We don't love them, but they give us stability and they give us security. We accept the status quo sometimes because generationally, that's what we're expected to do. And the alternative is too risky. But opportunity does not come gift wrapped. You have to take risks and work for it. And the danger with settling and playing it safe, as I often say to people, is that when change is visited on you, you will not be in a position to deal with it. The Mark Zuckerman quote is a very good one. He said, the biggest risk is not taking any risk. He said, in a world that is changing so rapidly, the only strategy that is guaranteed to fail is not taking risks. The only way, my next guest would say, to keep pace with opportunity is to never get too uncomfortable with risk. And my guest today is Brett Stenhouse. So Brett is a board advisor, executive partner and collaborator. He's the Senior Director, Communication and Executive Engagement for Giant Oracle in New York. Future 500 software and infrastructure computing giant Oracle tops an illustrious array of companies that Brett has worked for, among them AIG, Guardian Life, KPMG, Rio Tinto, I knew you then, Brett, and Suncorp. Brett's career has all the hallmarks of ambition meets aspiration. His stewardship of communication and engagement, believe it or not, reaching close to, did you say, Brett, 500,000 people around the globe?
I think about 500,000, Roisin.
Yeah. So unlike many executives who favor stability as their careers mature, Brett is a husband, he is a father. Brett never gets uncomfortable with professional risk when it comes to opportunity, adventure, and action on the global stage. Welcome to the show, Brett. It's been a while, but it's lovely to have you.
Fantastic to be with you, Roisin. Thanks for the great intro.
Oh, gosh, not at all. That's your story. You know, it's interesting. Some people have good jobs. We alluded to in the intro. They have security, they have stability, you know, a good income. You were one of those. You know, you were definitely one of the, even here, you were one of the rising stars. What motivated you to up sticks and head to the US? What was the plan?
Look, I might be a bit of a masochist, Roisin. I think it was really about fulfilling a personal ambition. I'd always wanted to build a successful career overseas. I'd used up my 2-year work holiday visa in the UK when I was studying. And I fell in love with the US and New York specifically when I came here on vacation, probably a little over 10 years ago now. But even prior to that, I had been entering with my wife the US green card lottery and seeing if our number came up and the opportunity would present itself. You know, I think the thing with the US is and New York in particular is there's a sense of challenge coming here that you certainly get whenever you move overseas and you try to set up shop overseas. But you know, I think as Sinatra sung, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. But you know, having said all that, I was under no illusion of the risk that we were taking, and you know, thankfully my wife was supportive and agreed to go along with it, and was prepared to take care of our infant daughter, who was less than a year old at the time, and she was working herself, and she did all that while I came across trying to pursue this dream. So you know, I was incredibly lucky, I should say, from that perspective. So you know, I think as the title of the show says, you know, was it brave or was it stupid? I think in hindsight it turns out to be brave, but and you know, part of that is luck, but I think there's also a large element of preparation that I did and we did as a family in the weeks leading up to my departure, months leading up to my departure, that helped minimize that risk.
Yeah, and I guess that's a very interesting. And that comes back to that point. What does taking the right risk mean to you? So you're saying do the preparation. So perhaps you can talk us through. I'm thinking of the US. It's a huge employment market. And I'm thinking, where do you even start with researching companies that might want to employ you? You've got multinationals all over the show, and you are heading for New York. So I guess, how do you know? Well, firstly, how did you evaluate those companies? Secondly, how did you know what image to project to them? And how did you know how that preparation would equal making the right move for you, or taking, I think we say, take the right risk? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of uh, it was scouring job boards. It was really making sure I understood the market over here, and I understood the differences between the market. And a director role in Australia is not the same as a director role in the United States. A manager role in the US is something that you might end up in when you're 1 or 2 years out of college, whereas a manager role in Australia, you might be a 7 or 8 year plus professional before you're getting there. So I had to kind of understand where to position myself in the market, and understand the opportunities that were out there. And then it was in the period leading up, it was about trying to get my name out there as much as possible, making sure the way I marketed myself, my key marketing document, which is my resume, was right for the United States. And it is a very, very different beast here to Australia. The resume over here it's a sales pitch. It's your opportunity to try and sell yourself in less than 2 pages, and sell what you've achieved, and really talk yourself up. And I think that's it's a big difference to Australia, where you have the 3 or 4 page resume in some cases, and you outline a bunch of responsibilities, and you outline maybe some achievements in there as well. But one of the best investments that I made before moving over was in hiring a resume writer to help me with my resume, and help me understand how to tell my career story in the marketplace over here. And that
So,
was
Brett, that resume writer was obviously in the US. So you got somebody that could write in the language, in the culture, understanding the industry, exactly what they were looking for there.
Yeah, precisely. It was someone who was specific to the communications and marketing industry. They understood exactly how to position professionals in this field. And to be honest, Roisin, it was actually one of the most challenging exercises that I've had to undertake professionally in my career, to look back and think through what I have achieved, and then get it on paper in a form that that she could then digest it, and put it into a marketing document for me. But it was probably probably the best exercise that I've done in terms of being able to position myself professionally.
It's interesting, because here I constantly say to people, we talk about identify. You need to know who you are and what you are and the value you bring to the party. And the difficulty, I think, for people when they're writing their own personal career stories, you've actually got to step outside yourself. You've got to actually think about the employer mindset. And then you've got to bring that experience. You've got to relate who you are, what you are, and the value you bring to that employer, or to that industry, or to that culture, or to that country, as the case may be. And so, yes, people feel incredibly, even great writers, award-winning writers, are challenged by that process. It's an interesting one, I think, because you would have obviously had rejections along the way. And so maybe you can say, how did you cope with rejection?
Yeah, I think the first month or so, after I moved over, even though I'd done all this preparation, I had a really strong resume. I had my name out in the market, and was networking with people who I thought could potentially help me. the knockback still came flowing in, either straight after the application or after an interview. And no, I think you have to have resilience when you take career risks like this. You have to be prepared to be knocked back. You have to have the right sort of support network. So again, I can't speak highly enough about the role my wife played in helping see me through. Sorry, my cat is trying to interrupt. But every interview that I did in those days, I treated as a great practice session, an opportunity to really understand the nuances of employers here. And the reality in this market is that it's huge. And while there are more opportunities, there's also a lot more really highly skilled competition. So knockbacks are going to be inevitable.
Yes, I kind of did wonder, you were talking about the resume writer, and I was wondering how you used to get past the application tracking systems. Because, of course, in the big multinationals, they've got these global, as we all do, CRMs. I've got actually somebody placed next week who was working for an international company. And one of the criteria for that role, with a previous employer, and they're working with an international company, was that this was their referee talking about them. Sorry, I should explain. So I've placed them into a contract next week, but they had previously applied for a role with this US company, actually, but they have offices around the world. And in fact, the CV never got through the global HR system, because this person didn't have formal qualifications. But they persisted. And they managed eventually to get a phone call or rang the office. And one day somebody picked up the phone, and the minute they spoke to them, said, "This is the person for the job." And best decision they ever made. And this was the referee talking to me last week. So that level of persistence and that level of, being able to be resilient if you are getting the knockbacks. I'm still curious, though. Your first employer in the US was who?
It was Guardian Life.
So, okay, you'd work for Suncorp, you'd work for Rio and some of those, but Suncorp probably was an AIG. So they would have been a fairly good, the fact that you had that previous industry experience was probably something that would be appealing to them. Did you ever ask them what stood out in your application to them? Did you ever sort of say, what was it about me in Australia wanting to come to, they didn't sponsor you, did they?
No, they didn't. I was lucky. We had our number drawn out in the green card lottery eventually. And
yeah.
And so it made the process a little easier.
A lot easier.
There are other ways for Australians to get work in the United States, and it's certainly easier for Australians than a lot of nationalities with visa classes like the E3. But you still need to be equipped when you go into interviews to talk about why you have the right to work and why that's not going to be a burden on the employer. And you need to be able to do that really, really quickly, because they hear the accent, they know you're not really local, and employers typically don't want to go down the sponsorship path.
Come back to, I think that's true, because I get applications from New Zealand and it says, "I'd love this job," but they don't explain to me, they're still living in New Zealand. How are you going to get here? How are you going to support yourself? How are you going to deal with COVID-19 quarantines? All these other things that occur. Come back to Guardian Life. How did you know? What was the first sign that you'd actually got the right message out there? And was that one part of your plan? Whatever industry experience I have, that's what I'm going to chase in America, because at least if I have the industry experience, that's a shoe-in, potentially.
Yeah, I was fortunate with Guardian. I had got into a position where I had multiple offers, and I was called in for a discussion with Guardian as well. And I think it's one of those things, Roisin, where you go into a discussion and you're more relaxed, and you don't have the pressure of getting the job, and that's when you have a really great discussion with the interviewer, and you get to know them personally, and you can kind of understand the company needs, and they can understand your background, and I think that's that's what happened with Guardian. I went in and I had a great chat with a guy who is still a good friend today, who is from Alabama, and we got to talk about his background and his cool accent, and he asked me about my cool accent and my background, and it was just a good match. And I think, being able to go in that relaxed state really helped with that.
Do you think, you said you had 6 months of prep. You really did your research. You really got into the headset. Then you flew to the US. Yeah.
That's right.
You were there. So you were there. You didn't say, I'm here, sponsor me and bring me over. You said, I'm here. Let's talk. So therefore you took away any obstacle that distance created, because you simply said, this is my position. I'm ready. By the way, you weren't able to tell them you had a green card at that stage. So you had landed, but how were you able to work for them?
No, I had a green card at that stage.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, we landed. I landed with the green card and had the right to work. But even before I came across, I had a US postal address. I had a US phone number, and I was applying to jobs using those details. So I set up a US phone number on Skype back in the day, and I was getting phone calls in the early hours of the morning and late at night, and I would have those discussions, and I would explain to them that no, I'm not there right now, but I'll be there soon, and let's keep on talking.
Fantastic. So once you actually got that green card, you were full pelt ahead. Do you think it's, you said it's an interesting one. I'm thinking, you're in a work sense right now, and you've come out of Australia, and then you head off to the big smog, as I call it, New York. And when you were actually writing your CV, what were the 3 things that you emphasized yourself that you thought they would want most? I mean, you've said, they're definitely more commercial. I get all of that. But what was it? At the end of the day, you had to identify your brand. And yes, you had the CV writer who helped you with that. But there must have been 3 key messages that you were trying to get across each time so you could get this interest from these massive companies.
Yeah, I think the number one key thing was my commitment to connecting and success. And success is probably the key word, and the word that they look for over and over again. But my success in connecting executives and strategy with employees, and how I'd done that. So and what metrics I'd managed to move through the strategies that I'd implemented. I think that was the one thing that that we were clear to emphasize over and over again, through every role, and showing that progression, the career progression, and becoming more successful as my roles became more senior. I think that was really, that's if you kind of look at most US resumes, and I've just hired someone myself, and I looked at probably 40 or 50 resumes through that process. They were the things that I was looking for as well. What has this person done to influence the success of the businesses that they've supported?
I think often, obviously I'm a career advisor. We do a lot of work in the career space, hence the Living Your Career program. But one of the things that I think people really struggle with is strategic value, where they bring the strategic value. That ability to understand the business priorities, that ability to take them to a new level, that ability to align with them and be able to show your contribution and your achievement relating to them is vitally important. And it's really just how you tell the story once you have the facts. Interesting that you emphasize measurement. Explain that to me. So the American context is very much, you've got to be able to measure your results. If you can't measure it, they're not results. Is that the way it is?
Yeah, I think more or less that's the way it is. They love being able to say they've moved the needle from point A to point B. And I think it's the same in Australia. I don't think the differences in the markets are that great. It's just the Americans are probably better at selling themselves and selling their achievements, whereas Australians they still achieve as much, but they don't necessarily want to talk about it all that much.
Mm. I do think I definitely found that when I moved from the UK here. I was working with A&P in the UK, and I relocated to obviously the Gold Coast and Brisbane. I could have gone to Sydney, but it was interesting. One of the first things I realised is that, calm it down, Roisin. They're much more sort of laid back here, whereas in the UK and in the US, which was what I was used to working with, you know your stuff, you talk to your stuff. And so, yeah, that wasn't really the way it's done here. But I find the way I still admire the way we do it here. It's just a different method, as you say. It's interesting, you've worked with these big companies, continents, companies, cultures. What's been the most stark difference for you culturally? Well, I mean, we're talking about, firstly, the way the Americans are, and they speak up, and they're very much about sort of performance and metrics. But like actually living in New York and going to work each day in this big metropolis, and what was that like culturally for you?
Yeah, I think
And for your family, I suppose. Yeah.
yeah, I think the biggest difference culturally in the workplace is probably the way things get done. And I think both, regardless of where you are, that the stuff gets done, right? But in the US, I think companies and employees are really focused on gaining consensus and gaining consensus from all stakeholders before they move to execution. Whereas I think the Australian approach is more move to execution and then build consensus along the way. So both approaches work. I think both get you to the same goal eventually, but they definitely take a different route. And I think the other big difference is the embrace of success. So in the US, if you achieve something, you are celebrated, and that success, that achievement is celebrated. Whereas I think in Australia, it's not the case so much.
Again, comes back to that laid back style.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's interesting because there's the laid back style in Australia, but I think both cultures still have a big issue with work-life balance. I still think Australia and the UK are still probably a little bit imbalanced more towards work than the life side of things.
That's going to be some subject we're going to have to pick up further down the track, isn't it? Because yes, I think this living your career piece, that balance is vitally important. Mental well-being nowadays with COVID-19 and all sorts. I think there's a bit of a rally though, and a bit of a mobilization out there to try to reconcile the amount of work with the amount of lifestyle that people have. So I think COVID has certainly, I think, woken people up to that. Where it goes, I don't know. Have you ever made wrong choices that still perhaps led you to the right career goal?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. So, well, I don't know that I necessarily call them wrong choices. I think there are two good examples where I could have made different decisions, and I might have ended up on a different path. So, the first example, and what I'd probably call my biggest oh crap moment was when I started at AIG, and I moved from a great company, Guardian Life, which we've talked about a little bit, and I had a great reputation there, and I was really comfortable. And I got to AIG, and AIG was still really recovering from the global financial crisis. A lot of really smart people working there. I was part of some fantastic teams, and worked for some tremendous bosses. But I underestimated the legacy and impact that the financial crisis was still having on the business, and I was supporting a technology organization, and and driving a communications and organizational change agenda. And when you are trying to drive transformation within technology on one end, and modernization and introduce new ways of working, and then on the other end, you try to reduce cost, it makes for a really challenging culture. And in hindsight, I probably didn't think that through clearly enough before I took the role. But I certainly don't regret making that move. I think it helped me grow. And in the moment, though, it certainly felt like I'd bitten off more than I could chew. No, I think the other example probably dates back to back when we were first talking, Roisin, and I'd just left Suncorp, and I had a couple of options on the table. One was to go to Bechtel, and the other was to kind of pivot my career down a marketing path, more of a marketing path. And both were great opportunities, and I went to Bechtel, and it might not have been the best role from a function perspective in terms of career growth, but it introduced me to a global organization, to a global role, and to a big US employer. And
you were leaving Suncorp, and you had Bechtel. What was the other choice?
Oh, I can't even remember the company name at the moment.
God, I'm hoping I'm hoping I didn't tell you which way to go. Could have done, though. Could have done.
No, it was a local investment fund, a local Brisbane investment fund. Both great opportunities. But the Bechtel opportunity, I think, is the one that opened doors for me in the United States when I eventually moved over here. They see that name on the resume, and they kind of have a heart type moment. They know the name. They know that I've been a part of a US company, and I think that helped.
It's interesting because you're saying, obviously, AIG, Suncorp, some of those, they were sort of the openers for you, that you had that industry experience, first opportunity in the US. Then you're talking about Bechtel working for a global company, and you're saying about making sure you do your preparation. So again, I guess for anybody who's tuning in and listening today, it's really vitally important that you think about who you're working for and how they might pave the way for international career success. I think that's what we're really saying here. I suppose the thing that I'd ask you now, you say don't ever get too uncomfortable with risk. There are lots of people right now, there's uncertainty in the market. People are sort of hovering over or hanging in and hovering in their stable and secure jobs because they're obviously very worried about, what the future holds, particularly with COVID-19. I guess what would be your advice to those people in terms of, taking calculated risks while still not, throwing everything out at once? So in other words, how do you continue to maybe not charge ahead, but at least take risks to keep moving ahead rather, so that you still have a level of security balanced with growth?
Yeah, I think, I don't think that the market uncertainty should necessarily drive decision-making here. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Roisin. It's about the preparation that you can be doing at this point. Obviously, a global career is difficult right now, particularly for Australians who are needing to apply for permission to leave the country. But if your dream is to grow your career globally, now's the time to start building your network. Understand the marketplace, understand what you're going to be getting yourself into when you arrive here. It's not just about the compensation package that the employers put on the table. What benefits do they offer? If you're going to come over and you plan on consulting, how are you going to deal with your insurance, your health insurance? What do you need to do to get a visa? What's the right visa class for you? And what's your narrative? And we talked about this a little earlier as well. What's your narrative to be able to explain to potential employers why it's not a risk to take a chance on you, and why they can employ you as an Australian just like they could employ any American citizen.
That's exactly right. Have you ever had that aha moment? I've really overstepped my mark here. I should have stayed at home. Has there ever been? I mean, you've taken your wife, and as you said, your 10-month-old to America. What is it, 4 or 5 years ago now? Well,
That's
has there
7.
ever in that 7? Oh, wow. Has there ever been a moment where you said, "Wow, this is crazy. I should never have done this. What have I done?"
Look, beyond the first couple of months, not so much. I think, personally, we've experienced some adversity over here, and I think during those times it could have been tempting to kind of throw in the towel and head home, but I think other than that initial time trying to get set up and being worried about whether I was employable and whether I could prove my own mum wrong and get a job in New York. I don't think I've had any regrets being here, and probably getting through the first winter here was a challenge as well. We were living in Hoboken, just over the border in New Jersey, and we looked out on the Hudson River, and the Hudson River was frozen, and that can probably give you an idea of how cold it was. And coming from an Australian autumn to that sort of weather was not pleasant.
The world is your oyster, Brett. You're in the US now, you're in New York, you've got your security, you've got your, a big career, and the future is just so bright for you. I guess what's next? Are you missing home yet? Are you thinking it might be time to come back? Your little one will now be 7 coming 8, I imagine. Is there the lure of family here, or do you still feel there's still a big field out there and you want to keep doing what you're doing for the time being?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when you go through a year like the one we've just had, and you kind of compare the way Australia has managed through the pandemic with how the US has done so, it certainly makes you consider things. And I definitely miss the order and the relative kind of normalness that Australians are enjoying right now, that I read Australians are enjoying right now. And being a dual citizen, it's nice to have options. It's nice to know that I could go home and then in the future potentially come back. And the other consideration is obviously family, Roisin, and we have family members who aren't getting any younger, and we have to consider their health and what makes sense from that perspective too. So I think that's a long way of saying we're here now, but I think the future could hold anything.
So to any employers out there that want to bring Brett Stenhouse back to Australia, just remember, we know where to contact him and we can find him for you. You haven't mentioned the weather once, which is the thing that I lived at. Obviously, I'm dual citizen, Irish and Australian. And I sort of think, for me, I love Ireland, of course. I lived in the UK for 16 years, so almost like my second home. And then I came to Australia, and that was sort of it for me. But I do get back, barring COVID, I do get back every year. So there is that lovely benefit of having that dual citizenship. Okay, Brett, we have to wrap up. It's been an absolute pleasure. Well, firstly, great to catch up with you again.
Likewise.
Lovely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And lovely to have you share your thoughts and give people those pearls of wisdom. To anybody who's tuning in today or listening to this podcast or Facebook or whichever means you're listening to this on later on, for those of you that want to sort of get out there and really explore the big wide world, I think the key messages from Brett today are, do your preparation. Make sure that you get yourself into the headset of where you're going, who you could be working for. If you're not there yet, start paving your way towards that. So start looking for the bigger employers with the international reach that, so at least the American employers can say, well, they've worked for a global company already. We'll bring them over. It's not such a big transition. Is there anything else, Brett? I think that's probably it. Be resilient. Oh, banking. I know one of the things you said to me was banking. Yeah, making sure you've got financial reserves. Yeah.
Well, and one of the other things that I'd say, and you had Esther on episode 10 talk about the reputation of Australians in the global marketplace, and she was spot on. It really does give you an advantage here in the US, and probably here in the US more than other markets because of the barriers to entry to work over here. But Australians have really developed a reputation for being able to get stuff done, a great reputation in the marketplace. But the one thing I'd say is it also means, in my opinion, that anyone coming into the market here has a responsibility to those who follow to uphold that reputation. So the great thing is there's Australian networks all over the globe. There's an Australian network based in New York, which is very strong, and it's full of members that want to help. Reach out to those groups, use the resources that are available.
Fantastic. Brett Stenhouse, you're a gentleman. I thank you for your time. You're going to stay on because we're going to have a chat. To everybody who's tuning in, thank you for joining us on the Living Your Career show today. We're back next Tuesday, Brisbane time. And I think in the meantime, keep living, keep learning, keep growing your career, and keep taking those smart risks to grow your career, more importantly. Thanks, Brett. Pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Roisin. Great to be here.